after a Zelda series pattern of alternating between sort of main entries and side stories, perhaps after Majora's Mask the fans were expecting a return to Hyrule and another grand adventure. And while that game was in the works, in the meantime, Miyamoto was approached by Capcom, who wanted to try their hand at making a Zelda game. So Nintendo commissioned a bunch of Zelda games from Capcom, but with some hiccups in development, the number eventually was narrowed down to 2. The final products were The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, marking the series' first return to 2D gameplay. Now personally, I have always considered the Oracle games as the most overlooked and underappreciated Zelda games in existence. I attributed this to being 2D games at a time when 3D Zelda was new and exciting, released by a third party at the tail end of the Gameboy Color's life, and sandwiched between some of the most impressive games in the series. So all this may have combined for just the wrong time and wrong place for these 2 games. But then I looked up the sales for the Oracle games and was completely shocked. These games actually sold super well. So the actual reason then that they are overlooked is, well, fuck if I know. All I know is that it's a huge disservice because let me tell you, these games are fantastic and easily the pinnacle of 2D Zelda. Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons released side by side in 2001 in red and blue boxes, so you would be forgiven for thinking that they were doing the Pokemon thing of having the same game with just a handful of changes. But this is nothing more than just questionable packaging, because in truth, each game has a unique overworld, a unique story, a unique central mechanic, and 8 unique dungeons. I've heard a lot of talk about how Seasons is more action-oriented and Ages is more puzzle-oriented, and this is true to an extent, I guess, but that's not to say either game is lacking in one of these areas. Seasons has a ton of unique puzzles, and Ages actually has the more action-packed finale. It's not a major point of contention in my opinion, and it's really not something I ever noticed until I first heard it brought up. It's kinda stupid because there are other genuinely important things that distinguish the games, and perhaps the biggest of these is tone. Just like with the N64 games, one is more lighthearted and adventurous, while one is more somber and sad. It's a really nice dichotomy, and more than anything, it illustrates how well the 2 games complement each other. So yes, even though individually they are both great games on their own merits, playing them together propels them into a higher class of Zelda games, and is the reason I am reviewing them both together. That, and the fact that there is quite a bit of overlap in terms of music, items, and structure, and because I'm fucking lazy. But nevertheless, these games are meant to be played together, else you just miss out on half the experience. One game has better music, one has better items, one has better dungeons, one has more to explore, and both games actually connect with each other to form one complete journey that culminates in a true final boss and ending. So in conclusion, just play both. So with 3D Zelda fulfilling the role of sprawling epic adventures, the Oracle games were free to reuse the engine of Link's Awakening and have progression function in the same way, of needing items from each dungeon to unlock the world piece by piece. But the defining element that's missing from Link's Awakening is the underlying charm and whimsy. The Oracle games are quite a bit more straight-faced and serious, and in fact they don't even turn out to be that much of side games after all, as both Zelda and Ganon make appearances. So the question is, can the structure of Link's Awakening survive without that game's atmosphere and wit? Well, the short answer is yes. The long answer is fuck yes. Because basically every other aspect of the Oracle games is vastly superior to those found in Link's Awakening. Just thinking back to my nitpicks on that game, pretty much everything has been fixed. The interruptive text is gone, getting around the overworld is much easier because of a new warping system, and get this, rocks disappear permanently.
Take that, you rock!
And despite only 2 item slots once again, menu navigation is faster and swapping items is much less of an annoyance overall. There are far more items, more side quests, more customization, more upgrades, more secrets, more mechanics, better dungeons, much more to explore. Basically what I'm saying is, unless the only reason why you like Link's Awakening is for its story and tone, then there's absolutely zero chance you won't also love these games. Oracle of Ages and Seasons tell another offbeat story in the history of Hyrule, an entirely self-contained tale with no clear relation to any other game. Link is summoned to Hyrule Castle by the Triforce and whisked away to the lands of Holodrum and Labrina, which are in need of aid. The oracles Din and Nehru that watch over the lands are captured, causing widespread destruction and despair. Link is tasked with saving the girls and eventually discovers a plot to resurrect the evil King Ganon. It's generic enough to where it could take place nearly anywhere in the timeline. In fact, it's so irrelevant that Nintendo even changed its official timeline placement at one point. So not much going for these games in terms of how they contribute to the overall lore. In Seasons, we have the villain Onyx who kidnaps Din and plunges the climate into chaos. Link must acquire the Rod of Seasons to gain control over the weather and save Holodrum. That's pretty much it. You fight Onyx at the end and save Din and everything is peachy. Ages, on the other hand, has a much better story. Nehru is possessed by the villain Varan, who travels to the past to wreak havoc. Link must find Nehru's special harp that lets him travel back and forth through time to save the land of Labrina. This one has actual supporting characters, like Queen Ambi, who is working her citizens to death building a tower to the heavens, and Ralph, who is basically Gary Oak.
Hey, look, it's the Sucker Squad!
The villain Varan is plenty more interesting, and you actually have run-ins with her, and have to fight her possessing Nehru midway through the game. I love this part because it happens out of nowhere, like you finish a random dungeon and it's like, oh shit, go save Nehru now! And Nehru actually helps you out by teaching you songs. Nothing like this happens in Seasons. After the opening scene, you don't encounter either Onyx or Din again until the very end of the game. As a result of this, Ages has the vastly superior finale. The Black Tower is being assembled the whole game, you visit it early on when it's under construction, and then get glimpses of it reaching higher and higher. And at the end of the game, you climb up the completed tower to kick-ass music and fight through waves of progressively harder enemies. At the top, you have to get through a maze and solve a riddle before finally reaching Queen Ambi, who's being possessed by Varan. You exorcise the villain out of her and then fight Varan's true form, but even after defeating her, she drags you back in for a final bout in 3 separate forms. In Seasons, you walk up to Onyx's random castle, which is 3 rooms, and then you fight Onyx, who turns into a dragon. The disparity here in the quality of the 2 stories is more striking than any other difference between the games. It makes me wonder what happened at Capcom to leave one so clearly underdeveloped. But no matter which story you play through first, after finishing the game you are given a password to plug into the other game, where your journey continues and people actually recognize you as that person that saved the other land. By playing both games in succession like this, the true story is unveiled, where it turns out both Onyx and Varan were just pawns sent by Twin Rova as part of a plot to resurrect Ganon, and Zelda shows up too just to be a sacrifice. At the end, you face Twin Rova and the revived Ganon. So that's pretty cool and all, but it doesn't really make for a great story. I mean, Twin Rova? What the fuck? Why this random ass boss from Ocarina of Time? Yes, I know they supposedly raised Ganondorf, but that was like 1,000 years ago, and they died in that game. So Twin Rova in these games is not an interesting villain, and Ganon gets revived as a shell of his true self just for one battle and then dies again, so nothing of real importance happens. The games are trying to tie into the main Hyrule games with Zelda and Ganon and the Triforce, but it just doesn't really land. That's not to say absolutely nothing is contributed. For instance, I'll bet you didn't know that the 3 crests of the goddesses made their first appearance in Oracle of Ages. So that's pretty neat, and I also really appreciate these in-game artwork stills. They look fantastic and help bring the story to life much more than what should be possible for an 8-bit game. But still, among the 3 stories going on here, the fact remains that the only real solid one is the Oracle of Ages line. But fortunately, this is about the only aspect of the Oracle games that falls a bit flat, because gameplay-wise, these games hit every mark and more. The pacing of both games is absolutely impeccable. New areas are constantly being introduced, and dungeons are plentiful but nicely spread out between interesting side quests. I've always loved the pacing in Ages because aside from the phenomenal dungeons, the stuff in between is so much fun in my opinion. There's this part where you arrive on an island and get mugged and have to go about getting all your items back, which might sound like padding, but it turns out that getting your items back is like one giant puzzle. All the overworld stuff in Ages has to do with going back and forth through time, which is used for a variety of reasons. On Crescent Island, it's used to solve puzzles. On Rolling Ridge, it's used to collect trading items through generations of minigames. In the Zora Seas, it's used to navigate around drifting islands, as well as changing events from the past. The game is so perfectly paced that it's really hard to put down. But hell, so is Seasons. This game is actually faster paced than its brother, and as a result, everything feels a bit less significant but more energetic. For example, most of the different kinds of seeds you get are given some kind of introduction in Ages, but in Seasons, you just happen across new seeds willy-nilly. The world is bigger in Seasons, so there's more you never even have to explore, like Goron Mountain. I wouldn't consider all this a detriment, it's just a different feel. It's more of a game you can just zone out into. Again, both games offering a unique experience while complementing each other perfectly. After each dungeon, you get a new season that you can switch to, and after you get all 4, you go through this really neat area that has you using all 4 seasons to solve puzzles and navigate through. I love this part of the game, especially for the music. And all the while, you're visiting this crazy underworld known as Subrosia. This place is actually a lot of fun to explore in itself. It's basically a mini overworld that is also sectioned off by item requirements. And the inhabitants of Subrosia are surprisingly entertaining and help give the world its own identity. For instance, you have to adapt to their customs by not asking politely for a job you want done. You have to say, do whatever. There's this shop owner who has no idea what he's selling, this guy who is obsessed with signposts, and this guy who is just chucking valuable objects into the lava because he wants to see an eruption. You also get to see how Subrosia interacts with the world above. You set off a volcano that melts the ground above and lets you traverse through the debris of the temple. There's a pirate ship that is stuck in the ground and you can see the other half in Subrosia. Okay, on second thought, that doesn't make any sense because wouldn't that mean the ship is coming down from above? It's clearly sticking out of the ground. Does that imply Subrosia is in like a parallel dimension? Wait a minute. Is it pronounced Subrosia? Oh fuck! Anyways, the final dungeon is also found here, which is pretty cool, and it is a great fucking dungeon, I might add. In fact, all 17 dungeons across both games are absolutely brilliant and easily the best 2D dungeons in the series with no contention. In Ages, standouts include the Moonlit Grotto, which brings back the Eagle's Tower formula where you have to hit 4 switches to drop a turnstile down to the floor below, and also features some kick-ass music. There's Mermaid's Cave, which has you completing the dungeon in both the past and the present, and Jabu Jabu's Belly, which has you changing the water level between 3 floors like an Ocarina of Time. That's right, this game is pulling no punches, bringing 3D puzzles into a 2D space, and this dungeon is actually harder than the Water Temple. I fucking love it. In Seasons, we have Dancing Dragon Dungeon, which is pretty straightforward, but I wanted an excuse to play this goddamn awesome music track. There's Unicorn's Cave, which is a sort of open floor plan key collectathon featuring crazy magnet puzzles, Ancient Ruins, which is basically an Indiana Jones temple filled with fun traps, and Sword and Shield Maze, which is my favorite dungeon between both games. One floor is ice and shaped like a shield, the other floor is fire and shaped like a sword, and you have to toss ice crystals down to the floor below to cool the lava so you can walk across it to the boss room. These are 3D quality dungeons brought into a 2D plane, and it's fucking impressive. A huge improvement over the dungeons in Link's Awakening is that the rooms are much bigger and actually scroll with you. This allows for much more interesting puzzle motifs, and indeed, the puzzle design in the Oracle games is nothing short of ingenious. There are these turnstiles that change direction when you enter them, so to get to a new room, you have to go around and enter it from a different direction, and this is utilized really well almost every time it appears. In the Ancient Ruins, you can find yourself at a locked block that you've already been on the other side of, which really makes you stop and wonder what purpose spending a key on it would serve. I was actually really stumped on this one. I don't think I ever solved it as a kid because if you want to cheat, you can just save warp to the beginning of the dungeon and skip this puzzle. There are these trampolines that launch you through holes in the floor above, and so you have to push them into the right spots to reach a new area. In Ages, there are colored dice blocks that have to land on a certain tile on a certain side. There are mine carts that you can ride in and you hit switches to alter their course, and there's a puzzle in Seasons where you have to bring the minecart into a room from the other side just so you can bring an ice crystal into the minecart and ride it back. Ages has a new twist on the crystal switch puzzle from A Link to the Past, where now you actually have to walk on top of the raised blocks. And Seasons has a few really great puzzles where you have to enter a room first from one angle to set something up, and then come back to it from a different route to solve it. And in Ages, even one of the bosses is a series of block puzzles. It's fucking crazy. The main area where I agree that Ages is more puzzle focused than Seasons is in a more puzzle-centric item set. There's the switch hook, which is like a hookshot with an emphasis on puzzle solving, the cane of Samaria, which is given far more creative uses than in its underwhelming debut appearance, and the seed shooter, which ricochets seeds off walls. But there are still puzzle items in Seasons, like the magnetic gloves, which lets you propel yourself and other objects with magnetism, and the magical boomerang, which lets you control its flight path. But there are definitely more combat-worthy items in Seasons, such as the hyper slingshot, which shoots at 3 angles at once, and the Rock's Cape, which lets you jump and hover. The upgrades also differ from game to game. Ages has upgrades for the Power Bracelet and Zora's Flippers, while Seasons has upgrades to the Rock's Feather, Slingshot, and Boomerang. Of the two, I definitely think Seasons has the better item set by a wide margin. But there are some cool secret items that you can unlock in both games, such as bomb shoes, which sprint after enemies and explode, and the Bigoron sword, which is not really practical, but damn if it isn't fun. Combat in general has noticeably improved from past 2D games with a really impressive variety of enemies, all with different ways to take down. Like these magnetic fucks who switch polarity on the fly, so you have to pull them towards you or push them into a corner, or just fucking corner them with a Bigoron sword. Fighting is slightly better in Seasons due to the more combat viable items, but once again, as is becoming the unfortunate standard for 2D Zelda, the games are lacking a truly tough and memorable enemy. One thing you'll notice is that every single boss from Zelda 1 is present in Seasons, but each of them is given a huge buff and a unique twist in defeating them. I actually really love that about this game, seeing all the crappy bosses from back then all reimagined and made more threatening. In fact, a lot of elements from Zelda 1 make their way into Seasons to the point where it could almost feel like a distant remake like Metroid Zero Mission. From the first dungeon being inside a stump off a little island with a bridge, the lost woods that you have to traverse in the right order, and bushes you burn that lead to people giving you rupees or taking them away. Apparently, one of the original games Capcom was planning was a remake of Zelda 1, and you can tell that some of these elements were carried over into the finished project. I suppose this could also explain the more simplistic story. Helping you traverse the overworlds of Labrina and Holodrum are 3 new animal buddies. There's Ricky, who can hop gaps and punch enemies, Moosh, who can hover through the air, and Dimitri, who can swim up waterfalls. You can recruit one of these guys as your permanent friend to call with a flute at any time. They can help you find the most secret planting spots, where you can plant a Gasha nut to grow a Gasha tree. They take a little while to grow, but you're rewarded with a prize, and the more well hidden the spot, the better the reward. While meandering around the overworld, you'll occasionally run into Maple, a witch apprentice who crashes into you and creates a mad dash for items. You can get good things from Maple and from Gasha nuts, including heart pieces and potions, but what you're really after are the game's main collectible, rings. These can be worn for a variety of different effects, including stat buffs, better enemy drops, or just crazy things like transforming into a monster. Some are more useful than others, of course, but it's always exciting getting a new ring and finding out what it does. One of the more interesting ones is called the Cursed Ring, which makes you take double damage and dish out half. This makes for the most challenging 4-heart run in the series if you start a Link game and transfer the Cursed Ring over right away. Some of the more forgettable enemies and mini-bosses become absolute nightmares, and it's a really fun time if you're looking for a Zelda challenge. The music in both games is absolutely amazing. All 17 dungeons have a unique tune, and most of them are super catchy and memorable. A lot of the other music overlaps, but there's just a ton of great songs between both games. When I was a kid, I would put the Gameboy Color speaker up to my ear just to jam out. I know it's unlikely to happen, but I would love to see these games remade just for the sake of the sound quality. These tracks are way too good for this technology. So basically what we have with the Oracle games is fantastic pacing and level design throughout each game, both with great combat and puzzles and music and a ton of content. What more could you ask for in 2D Zelda? I'm having a hard time even coming up with nitpicks for these games, and I've been easily able to nitpick every other game to this point. But here I'm relegated to really stupid crap, like how in Ages, once you get the last harp song, it renders the other 2 obsolete, so why do I still have to select it? I also still have a problem with the 2 item slots, most egregiously in the really great moments in Ages where you are fighting possessed Nehru and Ambi. These fights require 3 items, so you have to keep interrupting the fights to switch, which breaks the immersion a bit. Why not just have the mystery seeds or the switch hook be able to damage Varan instead of only the sword? And in Seasons, it's really sad that you never unlock the ability to change seasons on the fly, which would have been a great late game ability. If the Rod of Seasons were to become another tool in your puzzle solving kit that could be used anytime even when it's not obvious, that would be great. But unfortunately you always need a stump, which gives half the solution away. But that's pretty much all I can think of besides what I already mentioned. To be honest, I have never had a problem with the dancing minigames that everyone hates. Like, I'm sorry, but you all just ain't got rhythm! So, in conclusion, I hope I've been able to convince you that Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons are fantastic games that deserve a second glance. It's really a shame how seldom they are discussed, and I have zero reservations whatsoever in calling them the best 2D Zelda games of all time. Just the fact that there's 2 of them makes this yet another highlight of the series. I know I'm saying that a lot lately, but this was clearly the golden age of Zelda that we're going through right now. And I don't see it slowing down next time as we head back to Hyrule and 3D Zelda. Yes, I know 4 Swords is technically the next game, but I'm gonna be skipping that one. For one, it's almost impossible to play nowadays. Back in college, when the game was actually available, not to mention free, I was living in a dorm where I could just walk out my door and find someone to play with. But I don't have any fucking friends anymore. Plus, I just don't feel like playing it. I don't hold any love for multiplayer Zelda, and I resent the fact that they're considered canon, and so I have to bring them up. I mean, they're enjoyable time wasters, I suppose, but if I'm gonna play a multiplayer game, it's gonna be fucking Rocket League or Smash Brothers. There, that's my review of 4 Swords. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.